Preacher Gabriel Mensah's rise to fame was nothing short of remarkable. His early years in ministry were filled with genuine passion, an unwavering commitment to spreading the gospel, and a zeal for serving God's people. He started in a small church in the outskirts of Alira City, often preaching under a leaky roof to a handful of congregants. His sermons were fiery and heartfelt, laced with stories of hope and redemption that resonated with the brokenhearted. As his influence grew, so did his ministry. Gabriel spearheaded initiatives to feed the poor, build schools in underserved communities, and sponsor scholarships for children who couldn't afford an education. These noble efforts earned him widespread admiration, and soon, he became a beacon of hope in Alira City. His work expanded beyond the city. He was invited to preach in other countries, speaking on grand stages to tens of thousands. Gabriel didn't stop there. Recognizing the need to raise the next generation of church leaders, he began mentoring young preachers, providing them with guidance, resources, and platforms to develop their gifts. To his followers, he wasn't just a preacher, he was a role model, a father figure, and a symbol of what faith in God could achieve. But beneath the dazzling exterior of his ministry lay a troubling secret. As his influence grew, so did his appetite for power, wealth, and pleasure. It began subtly, innocent at first. Gabriel justified small decisions as necessary for the growth of the ministry. When the church's offerings started increasing, he skimmed a little from the top, telling himself it was for personal ministry needs. It was just a few cedis here and there, enough to buy a better suit or fund his travel expenses. After all, he reasoned, the worker deserves his wages, Luke 10 verse 7. But small compromises gave way to bigger ones. As the amounts he took grew, Gabriel opened secret bank accounts to hide his activities. He told himself it was temporary, that he would repay it someday. But the lifestyle his wealth afforded him quickly became addictive. Gabriel began frequenting underground casinos, initially under the guise of outreach to those living in darkness. What started as a casual visit became a habit. The thrill of gambling was intoxicating, and before long, he was gambling away church funds. When he ran out of money, he aligned himself with shady business people in Alira City, endorsing their projects in exchange for bribes. Even as his personal sins deepened, Gabriel doubled down on his public persona of generosity and righteousness. He donated millions to the poor, built more schools, and even started a hospital named after his late mother. This act of kindness cemented his reputation as a selfless servant of God. To the world, Gabriel was a man of unshakable faith, a role model who led by example. His congregation swelled to tens of thousands, and his sermons were broadcast on TV and social media, reaching millions around the globe. He became the face of Christian leadership in the city, a symbol of hope to those who had lost their way. But Gabriel's most damning sin was hidden in plain sight. Behind the scenes, he exploited vulnerable women in his congregation, women who came to him for spiritual guidance. Using his position as a preacher, he preyed on their trust and admiration, convincing them that their relationships were special and ordained by God. One of these women, Amma, was a young widow struggling to find her footing. Gabriel had mentored her, given her financial support, and promised to help her build her faith. But when Amma realized she was being manipulated, she threatened to expose him. Gabriel acted swiftly, paying her off with church funds and framing it as damage control to protect the ministry. He convinced himself it was necessary for the greater good. But Amma's departure left a crack in the armor of his carefully constructed image, a crack that would only grow wider as time went on. Even as his private sins spiraled out of control, Gabriel's public persona remained untouchable. He continued traveling to preach in other countries, delivering powerful sermons that brought people to tears. His mentorship program for junior preachers flourished, and some of his men became prominent leaders in their own right. Gabriel's name was on the lips of politicians, celebrities, and the everyday people who saw him as a beacon of hope. He was a man whose ministry had transformed lives, whose generosity had built legacies, and whose words brought comfort to the weary. But at home, his family saw a different side. His wife, Esther, had discovered his infidelity years ago but stayed silent for the sake of their children and the image of their family. His eldest son, Daniel, had grown disillusioned, struggling to reconcile the father he saw at home with the man the world revered. "Dad," Daniel once said, "how can you preach about holiness when you're living like this?" Gabriel's response was curt and cold. "You don't understand the weight of ministry. Everything I do is for the church. Without me, this ministry wouldn't exist." The weight of the secrets Gabriel carried began to fracture his family. Yet they, like so many others, stayed silent, bound by fear, shame, and the allure of the life Gabriel's fame afforded them. The elders of the church were once a united group, bound by a shared commitment to serve God and shepherd his people. But as preacher Gabriel's ministry expanded and irregularities became harder to ignore, fault lines began to appear among them. Elder Kwame, a soft-spoken man with a strong sense of integrity, and Sister Mary, known for her fearless pursuit of truth, had long harbored suspicions about the church's finances. They couldn't reconcile the discrepancies in the financial reports with Gabriel's lavish lifestyle. One day, during a private elders meeting, Kwame finally spoke up. "Preacher," Kwame began, his voice steady but firm, "we've noticed discrepancies in the church's financial records. The offerings are growing, but the funds aren't reflecting in the accounts. Where is the money going?" Gabriel leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, a faint smirk playing on his lips. The air in the room grew heavy as his eyes swept across the table, his imposing presence silencing the murmurs that had begun among the elders. "Elder Kwame," he said slowly, his voice measured but condescending, "do you know what it takes to build a ministry of this size? Do you know the sacrifices I've made? The sleepless nights, the burdens I carry? Instead of questioning me, I suggest you focus on your role in serving the church. Leave the financial matters to me." Kwame's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Before he could respond, Sister Mary stepped in. "With all due respect, Preacher Gabriel," Mary said, her tone firm, "transparency is not about questioning your authority. It's about ensuring that the resources God's people have entrusted to this church are being used responsibly. This is not an attack, it's accountability." Gabriel's expression darkened. His voice rose as he quoted Psalm 105 verse 15, "Touch not my anointed, and do my prophets no harm." Do you want to destroy the work of God with your baseless accusations? Do you know how many lives have been changed through this ministry? The room fell silent. Mary and Kwame exchanged glances, their resolve unshaken but their frustration evident. But not all elders shared their commitment to the truth. Elder Wilson, a man whose loyalty to Gabriel seemed unshakable, spoke up. "Preacher Gabriel is a man of God," Wilson said, his tone bordering on reverence. "Without him, this church would fall apart. Let's not sow division. We should be supporting our leader, not tearing him down." Mary turned to Wilson, her patience wearing thin. "Supporting our leader doesn't mean turning a blind eye to wrongdoing. We are stewards of this ministry, not enablers of sin." Wilson's lips curled into a smirk. "And who are you to judge what is right or wrong? God has placed Preacher Gabriel here for a reason. Do you think you know better than him?" Mary opened her mouth to respond, but Kwame placed a hand on her arm, signaling her to pause. He knew that arguing with Wilson would be futile. Wilson had long benefited from Gabriel's schemes. His loyalty wasn't to God's work but to the wealth and influence the ministry provided him. The rest of the elders sat uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the two sides. Many of them had their own suspicions about Gabriel, but fear and greed held them captive. fear of losing their positions, fear of the backlash from the congregation, fear of being ostracized by the community. And then there was greed, the allure of the ministry's wealth and the privileges it afforded them. Gabriel's ministry wasn't just a spiritual institution, it was a business, and being associated with it came with perks. Lavish dinners, expensive gifts, and the prestige of being part of one of the city's most powerful churches made it easier to stay silent. For those who wanted to speak up, the price seemed too high. The tension among the elders only grew as time went on. Mary and Kwame continued to push for transparency, but their voices were drowned out by the majority who chose comfort over conviction. At one point, Mary called for an emergency meeting to address the financial irregularities and Gabriel's growing scandals. But Gabriel, sensing the threat to his authority, walked into the meeting with a prepared speech. "I have served this church faithfully for years," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "Everything I've done, every decision I've made, has been for the good of this ministry. If some of you can't see that, perhaps you're not fit to serve in leadership." His words sent a chill through the room. Mary stood, her hands trembling but her voice resolute. "Preacher, serving faithfully means being above reproach. It means being accountable, not just to God, but to the people who trust us. If we can't uphold that standard, then we are failing as leaders." Gabriel's face hardened. "If anyone feels they can no longer serve under my leadership, the door is open. But remember this, division in the house of God is the work of the devil." The meeting ended in a stalemate. Mary and Kwame left feeling defeated but not broken. They knew they had to continue standing for what was right, even if it meant standing alone. The division among the elders mirrored the growing cracks in the church itself. Some members began to notice the lavish lifestyle Gabriel led and whispered their doubts. Others, fiercely loyal to him, dismissed any criticism as jealousy or an attack from the enemy. The words of Jesus in Mark 3 verse 25 came to mind, "If a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand." The church was becoming a house divided, a congregation torn between truth and loyalty to a man who had lost his way. Mary and Kwame continued their quiet efforts to uncover the truth, gathering evidence and encouraging others to speak out. But as long as Gabriel held the pulpit and wielded his influence, the battle for the soul of the church remained an uphill struggle. For the elders who chose silence, their complicity became a heavy burden. And for those who stood for righteousness, the cost of their courage would soon become painfully clear. At home, Preacher Gabriel's family lived in the shadow of his public persona. To the world, they were the epitome of a godly family, Esther, the dutiful wife who stood by her husband through thick and thin, and their 3 children, raised under the watchful eye of the church. But behind the closed doors of their grand home, the cracks in their perfect image ran deep. Esther had discovered Gabriel's double life years earlier. His gambling debts, secret bank accounts, and whispered rumors of infidelity had left her sleepless, staring at the ceiling night after night. The confrontation came one Sunday afternoon after Gabriel had delivered a fiery sermon on integrity. "Gabriel," Esther said cautiously, her voice trembling, "I need to talk to you about what I found." Gabriel barely glanced at her as he scrolled through his phone. "What now, Esther?" "I know about the money," she said, her hands gripping the edge of the dining table. "And the women?" "Gabriel, this has to stop. You're destroying this family, your children are watching." Gabriel finally looked up, his eyes cold and unyielding. "Esther," he snapped, "do you like being the wife of a man everyone respects? Do you enjoy the privileges this life brings? The trips, the designer clothes, the way people treat you like royalty? Then stay in your place. This ministry is bigger than you or your petty concerns." Esther felt her throat tighten, tears threatening to spill. She wanted to scream, to remind him of the man he once was, the man she had married. But Gabriel's words were a heavy chain, binding her in silence. Gabriel's children, Daniel, Sarah, and Emmanuel, were no longer oblivious to their father's actions. Daniel, at 19, had begun piecing the truth together. He had overheard hushed arguments between his parents and seen glimpses of the tension that simmered beneath their polished exterior. One evening, Daniel cornered his father in the study. "Dad," he said, his voice steady but filled with pain, "you're always telling people to repent and turn to God. But how can you stand on that pulpit and preach when you're living like this? How do you even sleep at night?" Gabriel, seated behind his grand oak desk, didn't look up. "You don't understand the weight of this ministry, Daniel," he said, his tone dismissive. "Everything I do is for this family and the church. Do you want to ruin everything we've built? You think it's easy to carry the burden of thousands of souls?" Daniel clenched his fists. "You're not carrying their souls, Dad. You're lying to them. And to yourself." Gabriel slammed his hand on the desk, his voice rising. "Watch your mouth, boy. Do you think you know better than me? If you don't like it, leave. But don't you dare question me." Shaking with anger, Daniel stormed out of the room. Sarah, 16, and Emmanuel, 10, watched silently from the sidelines, their young hearts weighed down by confusion and betrayal. Sarah, once proud to introduce herself as Preacher Gabriel's daughter, now avoided conversations about her family. She had seen the messages on Gabriel's phone one day when he left it on the couch, a string of texts from women in the congregation. She told no one, but her faith in her father, and in God, began to crumble. "I don't even know if I believe in all this anymore," she confided to Daniel one evening. "How can God let someone like that lead so many people? It's all fake." Emmanuel, the youngest, didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could feel the tension in the house. He noticed how his father avoided spending time with them, how his mother cried late at night, and how his siblings whispered behind closed doors. "Why is Dad always angry?" Emmanuel asked his mother one evening. "Doesn't he love us anymore?" At this point, kindly take a moment to click on the subscribe button and press the notification bell to be notified whenever a video is uploaded. You should join this community. Esther's heart broke at the question, but she forced a smile. "Your dad loves you very much, Emmanuel. He's just busy with the ministry." The words tasted bitter on her tongue. As Gabriel's sins piled up, so did the weight on his family. Esther struggled to keep the facade intact for the sake of their public image, but the strain was evident. She no longer recognized the man she had married, the man who had once prayed with her on their knees for hours, dreaming of a ministry that would change lives. Her silence wasn't born of approval but of fear of what would happen to their children, their reputation, and their livelihood if the truth came out. Daniel, on the other hand, refused to accept the charade. He began pulling away from the church, skipping services, and refusing to participate in youth activities. His once vibrant faith had turned into a simmering resentment. "I'm done pretending," he told Sarah one day. "I can't be a part of this anymore." Sarah, torn between loyalty to her family and her own disillusionment, stayed silent. But her silence came at a cost. Her prayers grew infrequent, her Bible gathered dust, and the hope she once had in God faded. Even little Emmanuel, too young to understand the full extent of his father's hypocrisy, began asking fewer questions about God. The cracks in the family mirrored the word of Jesus in Matthew 7 verses 26 to 27, "But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." Gabriel's house was built on the sand of lies, greed, and pride. And though the foundation had not yet crumbled, the storm was coming. Oma was a quiet but observant member of the church. As a single mother raising 2 young children, she admired Preacher Gabriel's sermons about faith, perseverance, and integrity. But the scene she had witnessed one rainy evening in the city's dimly lit alley, a preacher handing a thick envelope of cash to a known criminal, left her shaken. At first, she dismissed it as a misunderstanding. Maybe he's helping him turn his life around, she told herself. But the image lingered in her mind, and as she started paying closer attention to Gabriel's public persona, cracks began to show. On social media, Gabriel regularly posted messages about righteousness, integrity, and walking in the light. One post, in particular, stirred something in Oma. Integrity is the cornerstone of faith. Without it, we are nothing. The words felt hollow. How could someone preach about integrity while living such a duplicitous life? Oma wrestled with her thoughts, but her conscience wouldn't let her rest. She decided to act. Oma sought out Sister Mary, who was already known for her courage in confronting Gabriel. During their meeting, Oma shared everything she had witnessed, her voice trembling as she recounted the events. "Sister Mary, I've kept this to myself for weeks, but I can't do it anymore. I saw him with my own eyes, handing cash to that man, and I know what he's been preaching is a lie." Mary listened intently, nodding as Oma spoke. "You're not the only one who's noticed, Oma. Others have come forward, but they are too afraid to speak publicly. We need evidence, hard proof, to confront him. Are you willing to help me?" Oma hesitated. She knew the risks of standing against someone as powerful as Gabriel. But then she thought about her children and the example she wanted to set for them. "Oh yes," she said firmly. "I'm ready." Oma and Elder Mary began working together discreetly. They gathered financial records showing discrepancies between the church's income and Gabriel's personal spending. They spoke with other members of the congregation who had stories of exploitation and manipulation. Some were women who shared unsettling encounters with Gabriel, while others were staff who had witnessed his misuse of church funds. The most damning piece of evidence came from a local shopkeeper who had installed security cameras near the alley. When they reviewed the footage, it clearly showed Gabriel handing the envelope to the criminal in exchange for what looked like a contract. With everything compared, Oma and Mary prayed together, asking for courage and wisdom. The church was packed that Sunday morning. Gabriel, standing confidently at the pulpit, delivered a sermon titled "Living Above Reproach." His voice boomed as he quoted Proverbs 10 verse 9, "Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out." If you haven't subscribed yet, kindly click this button and the notification bell to get notified whenever a video is uploaded. The irony wasn't lost on Oma and Mary, who sat quietly in the congregation. When the time came for testimonies, Oma stood. Her legs felt weak, but she clenched her fist to steady herself. "Preacher Gabriel," she began, her voice trembling but clear, "you've preached about integrity for years. But your life is anything but. You've stolen from this church, betrayed your family, and exploited the people who trusted you. How long will you hide behind the pulpit?" Gasps filled the sanctuary. Gabriel's face turned pale, then red with anger. "What are you talking about, Oma?" he said, his voice rising. "How dare you make such accusations?" Oma stood her ground. "You can deny it all you want, but the truth will come out. You can't preach integrity while living in sin." Gabriel opened his mouth to respond, but Sister Mary rose and joined Oma at the front. "She's telling the truth," Mary said, her voice firm and steady. "And we have the evidence to prove it." Mary held up the folder containing financial records, testimonies, and surveillance footage. "We've been silent for too long," Preacher Gabriel. But the Bible says in Ephesians 5 verse 11, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Today, we are exposing the truth. The congregation sat in stunned silence as Mary began to lay out the evidence. She detailed the financial discrepancies, shared testimonies from those Gabriel had manipulated, and described the surveillance footage. Gabriel tried to interrupt, but each time, Mary cut him off. Preacher Gabriel, the Bible also says in Numbers 32 verse 23, be sure your sin will find you out. Today, your sin has found you. The service ended in chaos. Some members of the congregation shouted in anger, demanding Gabriel step down. Others defended him, refusing to believe the accusations. Gabriel, humiliated and defiant, stormed out of the church. In the weeks that followed, the church leadership held an emergency meeting. Gabriel was removed from his position, and a full investigation was launched into the church's finances. Amos' courage inspired others to come forward with their own stories, and the congregation began the painful but necessary process of healing. The revelations about Preacher Gabriel sent shockwaves not only through the church but across the entire city. News of his double life spread like wildfire, making headlines in local papers and dominating conversations on social media. Congregants who had once adored him now felt betrayed, and the church, once seen as a beacon of hope, became a symbol of scandal and shame. Gabriel was forced to step down as pastor after an emergency meeting of the elders. As investigations into his financial misconduct unfolded, the full extent of his greed became public. Bank accounts linked to Gabriel showed years of embezzlement, and the lavish mansion, luxury cars, and international trips he had accumulated were seized by authorities. Stripped of his pulpit and public respect, Gabriel turned to social media in an attempt to salvage his reputation. He began posting motivational messages, trying to win sympathy from his followers. One post read, "We are all sinners saved by grace. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. God isn't done with me yet." Another caption post showed him in prayer with the text, "Even when the world turns its back on you, God never does." #Grace wins #comeback story. Gabriel's followers were divided. Some rallied to his defense, commenting, "Stay strong, preacher. God uses imperfect vessels." Others called him out, writing, "Where was this humility when you were stealing from the church and hurting people?" The motivational posts grew more frequent, each one a calculated attempt to paint himself as the victim. Gabriel began framing the scandal as a spiritual attack and accused his critics of being tools of the enemy. Despite his efforts, public opinion remained largely against him. His attempts to manipulate the narrative only fueled further scrutiny and deepened the distrust of those who had once idolized him. For years, Esther and her children had lived under the oppressive weight of Gabriel's hypocrisy and manipulation. Now, for the first time, they felt the possibility of freedom. Esther filed for divorce and moved with the children to a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. She began attending a new church where she found support and healing among other women who had faced similar struggles. Daniel, who had grown resentful of his father's hypocrisy, began to rediscover his faith in this new environment. One evening, he told his mother, "For the first time, I feel like I'm seeing what real Christianity looks like." Sarah started attending therapy to process the betrayal and confusion she had carried for years. Even young Emmanuel, who had once been too young to fully understand, began to ask questions about forgiveness and trust. The family's healing wasn't easy, but it was genuine. For the first time in years, they felt a sense of peace. The church, though deeply shaken, refused to let Gabriel's fall define its future. The elders appointed a new preacher, one known for humility, integrity, and a servant's heart. Under new leadership, the church underwent significant reforms. Financial accountability measures were put in place, and transparency became a cornerstone of its operations. Sermons shifted from charisma and performance to heartfelt teachings grounded in Scripture. Almost courage continued to resonate within the congregation. Her actions inspired many to reflect on their own lives and recommit themselves to living their faith genuinely. The church became a place of healing for those who had been hurt by Gabriel's betrayal. One Sunday, during a testimony session, a young man stood and said, "If it weren't for Almost bravery, I would have lost my faith entirely." She reminded me that Christianity isn't about perfect leaders, it's about a perfect God. Despite his attempts to rebuild his image online, Gabriel's influence dwindled. His motivational posts, once filled with thousands of likes and comments, began to attract fewer followers. People grew tired of his attempts to manipulate the narrative and saw through his self-pitying facade. Without his family, his church, or his wealth, Gabriel was left in isolation. He moved into a small apartment and rarely ventured outside. For the first time in years, he was forced to confront the emptiness that his greed and pride had left behind. While the fallout from Gabriel's actions brought pain and betrayal, it also sparked growth and renewal. His family found freedom, the church rebuilt its foundation on truth, and Almost courage inspired a deeper commitment to integrity and faith. Gabriel's story is a sobering reminder of the consequences of hypocrisy, but it is also a testament to the power of truth and the resilience of genuine faith. John 8 verse 32 says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." For those willing to confront darkness, freedom and healing are always within reach. What lessons can be drawn from this story? Gabriel's story is a cautionary tale of how easily good intentions can be corrupted by unchecked ambition. His rise to fame was built on genuine faith, but his fall was marked by compromise, greed, and a failure to remain accountable. The world saw a man who embodied Christian leadership, but behind closed doors, he was a man consumed by sin. His generosity and good works, though impactful, could not absolve the deceit that underpinned them. His double life is a stark reminder of the words in Proverbs 16 verse 18, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." It also highlights the importance of accountability within leadership. Gabriel's unchecked power allowed his sins to grow in secrecy, reinforcing the need for transparency in ministry. As James 3 verse 1 warns, "Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly." This challenges us all to examine our hearts. No amount of public piety can hide a life of sin from God. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open. Luke 8 verse 17. As his life unraveled, Gabriel was forced to confront a painful truth: God is more interested in our character than our image. Only a life of integrity can truly honor him. Hypocrisy destroys faith. Gabriel's hypocrisy didn't just harm his ministry, it shook the faith of his wife and children. Matthew 23 verse 28 warns us, "In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness." Silence is complicity. Esther's and the children's silence allowed Gabriel's sins to fester. While they feared the consequences of speaking out, their silence only deepened the family's misery. Ephesians 5 verse 11 reminds us, "Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them." True leadership begins at home. Gabriel's failure as a father and husband highlighted the importance of integrity in all aspects of life. 1 Timothy 3 verses 4 to 5 emphasizes that a leader must manage their own family well before leading others. The family's silence served as both a shield and a prison, hiding their pain but keeping them bound to Gabriel's deceit. Their story is a sobering reminder of the cost of unchecked sin and the power of truth to set people free. John 8 verse 32. If you haven't subscribed yet, kindly do so by clicking the subscribe button and the bell to get notified whenever a video is uploaded. The power of courageous truth-telling, almost bravery, reminds us that standing up for truth, even in the face of fear, is an act of faith. As Proverbs 31 verses 8 to 9 says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, defend the rights of the poor and needy." Integrity must be lived, not just preached. Gabriel's downfall illustrates the danger of hypocrisy. Leaders must practice what they preach, as Jesus said in Matthew 23 verse 3, "Do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach." Accountability is a biblical mandate. The elders' willingness to confront Gabriel, though painful, was necessary for the church's health. Galatians 6 verse 1 teaches, "If someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted." Omo's story is a reminder that light will always expose darkness and that courage can spark change even in the most intimidating circumstances. Integrity is everything. Gabriel's fall serves as a powerful reminder of Proverbs 10 verse 9, "Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out." Leadership without integrity is destined to collapse, no matter how influential it may appear. Courage can spark change. Omo's bravery in confronting the truth changed the trajectory of an entire church. Her actions remind us of Ephesians 5 verse 11, "Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them." Faith should be in God, not people. Many in the congregation had placed their faith in Gabriel rather than God, leading to heartbreak when he fell. Jeremiah 17 verse 5 warns us, "Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh and whose heart turns away from the Lord." True healing requires accountability. The church's decision to rebuild with humility and transparency illustrates the importance of accountability in restoring trust. As 2 Corinthians 8 verse 21 states, "We are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord but also in the eyes of man." If you learnt a lot from this story, which of course I know you did, forward it to at least 10 people. If you haven't subscribed yet, kindly click the subscribe button and press the notification bell. Stay tuned for the next video.